the production quality, could use some improvement. But, I was really compelled to work on this project. It's a project that I've been, just fundraising for myself, grassroots style, for the last few years. And then over the summer, we shot the first, these first interviews. I mean, there's a lot more footage, clearly. But, so one of the things that really resonated for me is that I felt like through my experiences, it kind of propelled me and motivated me to want to share other people's experiences, because I just don't think that they get shared. And through the interview process, it was really powerful for me personally, because I felt like other people were sharing a lot of what I go through. And I have a relative amount of privilege, I feel like. I'm white, I'm Jewish, that's not necessarily a privilege thing, but in my family, education, if you don't need Jews, the education thing, is a big deal. And so, I had a lot of access to resources and things like that. Economically, it's kind of middle of the road, whatever that means. And so the other thing is I really wanted to, promote stories, because a lot of the resources I was seeing were what I felt like were, sort of typical, what I would say typical people, sort of digestible, palatable, sort of, I think these people are awesome and, plenty palatable, but just that I was seeing people that just didn't reflect a lot of my experiences as a more marginalized person. I'm in the queer community and pretty closely linked with trans and intersex communities. And so I really wanted to promote that some of the viewpoints of people of color and people who are fat and people who are trans and gender nonconforming. And so that was really the goal of the video, as well as people of different ages, because I don't know if you've talked, I don't know, tell me, I would love to hear sort of a little bit, if a few people want to share, what you've talked about in terms of pain, or just your own kind of understanding. Because you're all, am I mistaken that you're all doing a certificate program to do advocacy? Or is that some of you are, and different people are doing different things, I'm seeing?
Well, yeah. I'm getting my human services, alcohol and drug counseling
okay.
And I'm also getting an advocacy one.
Oh, okay.
But
okay, cool.
And this class is required for both of those.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Not to go on a tangent here, but with dependency issues, I always not always consciously, but just in terms of the way I conceptualize pain, I talk about pain as not just, and that, I guess that's another thing that I wasn't seeing really out in the world as much as I would like to, is the intersectional and multidimensional nature of pain, as not, people will separate them out. Oh, well, that's emotional pain, this is physical pain, or that's mental pain, this is physical pain. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong or policing anybody's language around that, but for me, as I learn more about the actual physiology of pain and how it cycles, I started understanding more all pain is emotional and all pain is physical on a core physiological level. And then there's the social aspects and the spiritual aspects as well. So for me, that's how I conceive of pain, is the emotional, physical, social, spiritual, that's all encompassed in pain. Because the other thing is, and that brings me back to the dependency issues and mental health issues, and mental illness, is that I felt like a lot of things were kind of being sidelined, or we want our chronic pain in terms of somatic pain, or anatomical pain, pain that is what's often traditionally, it hurts here, kind of conceived of. A lot of times that gets separated out because there's more stigma around either addiction issues or mental health issues, and of course when you're living with chronic pain, there's a lot of mental health issues, and when you have addiction issues, there's often a variety of different influences. And so I really wanted to bring it all, and this clip didn't quite represent that, but that's part of the goal of this project, and the other work that I do is to kind of bring it all into the sphere of how we experience pain, and that it is all part of, like I was saying before, the mental and the physical, and how those things influence each other, and then also how the stigmatization and kind of the compartmentalizing, especially in Western medical models, how that all feeds the stigma, you know. Oh, I'm not mentally ill, you know, my pain is real. Like, my pain is real, whereas like somebody who's like, quote unquote, diagnosed with a mental illness, well, their pain clearly isn't real, even though you put somebody with a mental illness in a, you know, functional MRI machine, it's like, well, their pain's clearly real, and who needs a functional MRI machine? Because like they're telling you, you know, they're sitting in front of you telling you their pain is real, right? But a lot of it is because of, you know, paternalism in medicine. I mean, I don't know how much you've all talked about, but, you know, sexism, paternalism in medicine, you know, just the compartmentalization in medicine and how these things have evolved, you know, classism, racism, you know, homophobia, transphobia. I mean, there are all of these constructs that feed into both promoting pain and how pain is actually used, in my view, as a tool of oppression, and then also how when you're live with a chronic pain condition, how, you know, regardless of how it's affecting you, if it's, you know, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, or usually it's, you know, all of the above, that really, you know, has a deep impact. And you know, how does that affect access to resources? How does that affect being believed? There weren't a ton of, like, this, again, this didn't represent that as much, but that's a recurring issue is, well, I'm just not taken seriously, I'm just not believed, you know, especially when it's invisible, or it's minimized, or there's a big misunderstanding about, and that's something I'll talk about a little bit more, about the nature of pain, that chronic pain isn't simply the kind of pain that somebody without a chronic pain condition experiences, but just ongoing. It's actually a whole different physiological process. Your brain actually gets rewired, and there are more and more studies coming out that they're looking at genetics and like what predisposes people, and that's part of what got me into this. Is I started learning about the connection between sort of the fear response and pain. And for a long time that was used as sort of this like, well, mind over matter, like just think your way out of pain, you know, if you just think positively, you won't be in as much pain. And that's bullshit, pardon my language. But there's a lot of legitimacy to some of the underpinnings of the fact that, you know, like I said, mental, physical, none of it's separate. I mean, this has been demonstrated. This isn't just me talking about it. And I can give you sources or things like that if you need them, or want them. You don't even just have to need them. You can just desire them. But this idea that what happens to us externally, even throughout generations, like I mentioned, I'm Jewish, so it got interesting to me because some of the research about trauma that gets inherited has been done with Holocaust survivors. And so it got me thinking, like, okay, epigenetic changes, so those are changes that are genetic changes, but they're influenced by the environment. So it's like the gene is either can be turned on or off, and just because you have the gene doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be turned on or off. So, and I hope I'm not like bouncing around with topics too much, but it got me thinking about, like, okay, so if part of what influences pain, chronic pain conditions, making a person more susceptible to developing a chronic pain condition, if part of that is genetics, and part of the genetic predisposition is, you know, basically what kind of trauma the person has experienced, both in their own life, but also historically and generationally, it's like, okay, well, what are the populations of people who have experienced the most trauma or are exposed to the most trauma? And so it got me thinking, oh, this is really a social justice issue, because, you know, in my mind, that's people who have been basically oppressed and abused. And so those are going to be, you know, poor people. There's going to be people of color. And I don't mean to make generalizations like, oh, the poor people, or oh, the poor people of color, like, let's save them all. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. That's totally racist and classist, and just, yeah, that's screwed up. But my point is that when it got me thinking about, okay, you know, who are the people who are going to be experiencing the most oppression, that really kind of, it doesn't mean that like people with privilege don't develop pain conditions. But that really got me thinking, oh, nobody's really talking about it in that context. Like they talk about trauma-informed therapy or sort of, I mean, that's even relatively new, trauma-informed understanding of things. But I got really interested in like, okay, but can we talk about this as a bigger social issue? And so that was one piece of it. And then the other piece, and I mean, there are multiple pieces, not just like split it in two, but another piece along the oppression and social justice lines for me was like, okay, so you have people who have been predisposed to trauma, oppression, abuse, etc. They're going to be more likely, and again, like this hasn't actually been like laid out and proven, this part of it. Different pieces that have led me to this, you know, this hypothesis have. But if you kind of, then if you look at, okay, on the receiving end, well, who are the people who are going to get the shittiest care and, you know, or be discriminated against the most? It's generally going to be people with less resources, people, you know, where there are prejudices, people who are already marginalized, and people who don't feel safe in a conventional medical setting, or even unconventional medical settings. So that's sort of how I'm sort of trying to have like this big umbrella of like, okay, these are all the pieces that I'm holding, and you know, my own experiences with pain make it that like I'm really slow to like actually produce the work that I want to be producing because I am managing chronic pain, multiple chronic pain conditions. But that's really the way that I'm holding it, and yeah, I guess, I don't know, I guess I'm kind of feeling like maybe I'll take a pause here, and I'm just wondering if anybody has any, like, I don't know, thoughts that came up, or, yeah, I don't know, just, or experiences you've had. It sounds like some of you do internships. Okay, I'm seeing, let's say it's a hand over here. Yeah, so go ahead, and then, yeah, we'll come over here.
I'm Michaela, and I wanted to know if you could say a little bit more about, you said chronic pain is not just ongoing pain. The brain actually gets rewired.
Right. Yeah. So there's again, like I don't want to insult anybody's intelligence, and I don't know what you've covered or haven't covered. So there's, and I'm not like a neurobiologist. I mean, you can call me doctor if you want, but you know, there's the neuroplasticity of the brain, and so what happens, and the neuroplasticity is, you know, it's become sort of this trendy sort of like, oh, the neuroplasticity, you know, let's all meditate. I mean, I totally, you know, meditation's great, but like, let's all meditate so we can change the neuroplasticity of our brains and lay down new tracks in our brains. But the sort of oversimplified version of pain is that it actually becomes a disease process because, so if you have an isolated acute injury, that's the pain. Okay, so say I hurt my hand. The pain that pain that would be in my hand while my hand is healing, that's actually alerting me to understanding that, oh, something's going on here. Like I have an injury and the injury's healed. Chronic pain is generally defined as pain that lasts, well, the amount of time it differs, but sometimes it's 3 months, sometimes it's 6 months. But the sort of typical definition includes the idea that it's pain that lasts longer than healing can be, healing could be like assumed to have happened. So the idea is that, okay, say I hurt my hand and then everything kind of anatomically has healed. Now, of course, granted, this is like anything we can see or detect, or, you know, oh, an injury like that should have healed, 6 months ago or whatever. I mean, according to whom, and that's like a whole, that's a whole other thing, and there's research bias and, experience bias, but that's, this is just sort of the general idea. So where the neuroplasticity and the pain actually being a whole different disease process comes into play is that, say my hand is completely healed, except that in my brain and my spinal cord and my nervous system, it doesn't believe, I don't want to say it doesn't believe, but it's in a mode where it is thinking that it hasn't healed. So what actually happens is it sends more pain signals, because it's like, you are not attending to me. I mean, well, this is sort of not a good analogy, but I'll use it anyway. Like a kid who's sort of like throwing a tantrum, and maybe they start off a little, they sort of like flow into it, They start off with like, okay, I'm trying to get your attention, and then they're doing more and more and more. So it's sort of like that. I've heard of pain, the actual process in the brain being likened to an addiction process. Not because people with chronic pain conditions are just addicted to opioids, which is like a whole other issue, but that the actual, I mean, anyway, because that's in the media a lot, and that's very controversial. How people are being like portrayed, like, oh, everybody in pain is just addicted to opioids that they don't need, where it's like, okay, well, that's a whole other topic. But that the brain, it's actually like, say you have an external substance. The brain is